Me, deconstruction at its core is noticing or pulling back the veils to notice the invisible structures that form our beliefs and our thoughts and our behavior, and asking that question, does this still serve me? And does it serve our society at large? That might be the more important question. This is a foundational video in this series and for this entire channel, because if we don't know what we're deconstructing and what that word means, then how can we deconstruct patriarchy? As a reminder, I want you to make sure that you are watching these videos in the order they are released, because they are building on each other, and the concepts that we have from the previous videos will be needed for future videos. Make sure you go and you save that playlist, Foundations to Deconstructing Patriarchy, History, and Myths. It's season 1, and watch the trailer all the way through video 3 before you continue in this video. What you're about to see me do is actually deconstruction, and I thought that that would be really important. You're going to see several different definitions of what deconstruction has meant over the time. You're going to hear the word semantics and how important that is to the work we're doing here. You're also going to start to understand, if you haven't before, that we need to read things with a contextual understanding of when and how they were written and the time they were written. All of that's covered in the next 10 minutes that you're going to watch. Just felt like that was super, super important if you want to stick with me to do this work, to see me do it in real time with this term as we are just building our understanding of what deconstruction means. But stick with me, because I will pull everything back together, and that's part of deconstruction, pulling everything apart to see what it means in its individual parts, and then putting it back together so that you have a working definition of something to be able to move forward with these concepts. When you hear the word deconstruction, what comes to mind? It is such a buzzword right now, and even in researching for this video, it is really difficult to get a definition for that. For me, deconstruction at its core is noticing or pulling back the veils to notice the invisible structures that form our beliefs and our thoughts and our behavior, and asking that question, does this still serve me? And does it serve our society at large? That might be the more important question. Another way to say this is that we are dismantling or pulling back the veil of how society was built by these patriarchal structures that became invisible over time. We're going to learn how to identify and challenge these invisible narratives that are at the foundation of our lives. In today's video, we're going to hit 5 different points. Number 1, we're going to try our best to get to a working definition of what deconstruction means. 2, we're going to learn how stories shape our belief. 3, we're going to learn how to identify a way to challenge these stories to see if they're still fitting our needs. 4, we're going to look at why deconstruction or dismantling our belief system could be uncomfortable and give you a warning. And number 5, I'm going to actually leave you with a model of behavior change that I learned as a personal trainer way back when, that I think helps us understand the process that we need to go through on a behavioral level to make these changes that we're doing with deconstructing patriarchy. So let's dive in. Now, in researching for this video, I took a couple stabs at this, and it was really difficult to get at a working definition that made sense, that wasn't just all up in the ethers for me. So I'm hoping that I've been able to do a good job to bring it back down to earth and make it working definition for us. I want to start with this idea that I learned back in my 9th grade English class from Mr. Yorkies at Munster High School in Indiana. So hi, Mr. Yorkies, if you're watching this, thank you so much. This is one of your lessons that has stuck with me for all of my life. But what he said about semantics is that semantics is this study of how language and words change over time, shaped by our culture. I want you to keep that in mind, because that is going to play into what is happening with this word deconstruction, but also with our society at large as words shape and change over the course of history, depending on the culture. I've actually pulled 4 different definitions in order to try to get at a meaning for deconstruction. For the first definition, we're looking at the Wiki definition. In this one, it says, in philosophy, deconstruction is a loosely defined set of approaches to understanding the relationship between text and meaning. The concept of deconstruction was introduced by the philosopher who described it as a turn away from the Platonism ideas of true forms and essences which are valued above appearances. Deconstruction is an approach, it's an active verb to be able to understand what's behind the text and meaning of something. All right, so that's number one. Number two, according to Merriam-Webster, there's actually two definitions I pulled here. Number one in Merriam-Webster is a philosophical or critical method which asserts that meanings, metaphysical constructs, and hierarchical oppositions as between key terms in a philosophical or literary work are always rendered unstable by their dependence on ultimately arbitrary signifiers. Saying that when we depend on a really concrete, let's use that word, way to understand something, therefore we are actually setting ourselves up for failure because most words are just symbols of the things that they are, right? So cup is just a symbol for this. It's not the actual cup. It's not the actual thing that holds liquid. So understanding that, again, is a little bit more philosophical. It doesn't give us a great working definition, so let's move on. Number two, according to Merriam-Webster, the analytical examination of something, such as a theory, often in order to reveal its inadequacy. All right, that one feels like it gets a little bit closer to what people are using this word as when they talk about deconstructing their faith. However, I don't like how this one automatically puts that it's going to reveal its inadequacy. I feel like I'm leading the horse to water when I want to talk about deconstruction, but it's really your work to see if it's inadequate or not for your own life and for society at large. Number four, I ended up turning to Urban Dictionary because Urban Dictionary tends to be the most semantical, if that's the right word, use of the words in our day and age, right? We're not trying to get at how this word has been used in the past. We're trying to get at the modern use. So I found two definitions within Urban Dictionary's resources to get at the heart of what this meaning of deconstructing is. And one of them actually does talk about the faith deconstruction, or deconstructing is what it's under. So that one is reevaluating your faith and what you were taught to believe. It is very often abandoning fundamentalism. For some, it is moving to a different form of the same faith, often a more logical, empathetic, progressive one. For others, it is losing faith entirely. It is quite often people seeing the cruelty in the evangelical church and choosing to follow the love that Christ commanded instead of their evangelical churches. This one is very specific to faith-based, which again, I think is what the buzzword has become about. I think it gives us a lot of great things that we can use within deconstructing patriarchy. So I'm going to look at that in a second again, but I want to move on to the fourth definition that I found by Chuckles Parker from April 9th of 2011. So this is way back when. This is actually before I started the process, which I didn't even have a word for this process back then. When I left my faith, when I started to dismantle is the word I probably would have used. So he says it is to school someone in the absurdity of a notion or belief by demonstrating the obvious primitive motivation that underlies it. First coined by French philosopher Derrida, somebody please correct me on that one, as a means of expressing the inadequacy of any fixed ideas which are in constant risk of obscurity because of an ignorance of contextualization. I'm going to say that again. This was a term first coined by that French philosopher as a means of expressing the inadequacy of any fixed ideas which are in constant risk of obscurity because of an ignorance of contextualization. That is such an important fact to remember. So one of the things that helped me lead me out of the Christian church was actually a Christian pastor that taught me how to read the Bible according to the context it was written in. I know that was not his intention, but when you learn how the authors were thinking at that point in time about the works that they were writing, then it really shifts your perspective on what these works are saying in our modern age. What this pastor would say is that you can't look back at history and apply your modern concepts or your modern semantics to these words that were written actually in completely different languages. They've been translated over and over again. Translation not always 100% accurate when it goes from one language to the next. Now, if we multiply that by thousands of years, language is not, again, because it changes and shifts over time, is not the same. The words do not mean the same thing back then as they do now. I mean, look at the word gay and how that's changed from the 1900s. It used to mean happy to now it means means a homosexual man. So there's plenty of words like this that we can understand that they shift and change over time. I did another video that I'll link here about gossip and how gossip, it wasn't in its original intent meaning something maligning, trying to take down another person's character. Gossip meant godsib. It meant a godparent, godmother, godfather relationship. And it was inherently useful to the community. That type of a relationship was useful to the community because it strengthened the community. So gossip was a powerful part of any community, especially within the female community, for helping them survive within patriarchy. That's a little history lesson for you on the word deconstruct and how we really have to do the work to understand what these ancient texts were saying, not just what they were saying, but the time they were writing in. What did they believe about certain things? What did they not believe about certain things that we now believe? And we have to strip all of that away to really get at the heart of what these people were saying in these ancient texts. And we have to ask questions. If we don't do this, then we risk applying ancient texts, whether it be history, religious, whatever, to our modern day clumsily, inadequately, and really reading into the past things that weren't actually true. Let's look at combining all of these definitions together to see what is happening within the Christian faith right now that this word has become a buzzword. What are they doing when they deconstruct? And then we're going to try to pull that out and use it for our method here on this channel. So number one, they're taking a deeper look at their faith by trying to get at the original contextual meaning that we just talked about and critiquing it from what the original authors believed at that time. Not in modern terms, but at that time, what they believed and what they meant back then, the semantics of that time. Boy, I drove that home enough for you. Number two, they're questioning what they find and then reevaluating their faith based on these findings to see if it still fits in today's understanding of equality, humanity, kindness, compassion, evolution, and into such things as the evolution of what we know about psychology, biology, and the other sciences. Number three, some find that the road of deconstruction leads them completely out of their religious tradition or faith. Some find that they stay in, as one of the definitions said, and maybe just go to a new version of that faith that has evolved along with the times and the understandings of our semantics of this day and age. But number four, all people, whether they stay in the church or not, because they're human, because we need a belief structure of some kind, have formed new beliefs over time that inform the world around them and in them. So this is a really important part that I don't think gets talked about a lot in the deconstruction movement. So now that we've looked at these 4 steps within the church, we're going to apply it to what we're going to do here on this channel. Number one, we are taking a contextual view of the past we have been taught through history, religious stories, and myths, trying to understand who is telling the story, why they were telling it, is there another side or view that is missing, and so much more. That's going to be the meat of the work that we do on this channel here. Number two, questioning what we find and reevaluating our lives, inner and outer, and our society based on these findings. And number three, we're rewriting our past and present based on our new findings in order to create a more holistic view of the past, present, and future. Simple as pie, right? All right. Woo. Let's move on to point number 2 for the day. How stories shape our beliefs. So from the moment we are born, stories are shaping our belief. We are told that we are either a boy or a girl. Some people might be told something different based on their genitalia, but that is the story that we come into this world with. These cultural stories shape how we behave, what we believe, and what we even think is normal. Some of these are so ingrained that it takes a lot of work to start to see them. And once you see them, though, you're not going to be able to unsee them. The earliest stories are based on our child's play. And this is something that I'm becoming even more intimately aware of over just the last couple of weeks in my own life. So I want to read you something from a Substack piece of one of the authors that I follow just intimately. I love her work. This is from Bonnie Marcus. She writes on Substack under Own Your Ambition. That's a tongue twister. Say that that one 5 times fast. And this is from January 15th of 2025. It's in the post, What on Earth Are We Teaching Girls? She wrote this article or this post about Jodi Bondi Nagard's book, More Than a Doll, How Creating a Sports Doll Turned into a Fight to End Gender Stereotypes. And what she says in this book is just, so poignant for what we're talking about here. Toys, books, and media are more than just entertainment. They're powerful tools that shape a child's understanding of the world and their place in it. According to Nagard, early experiences lay the foundation for how children see themselves and others, influencing their aspirations, opportunities, and choices throughout life. These formative influences ripple outward, affecting workforce diversity, economic strength, community and political leadership, household dynamics, and ultimately the progress of gender equality. When we provide children with diverse, creative, and inclusive play options, we foster the belief that everyone, regardless of gender, can dream boldly, achieve freely, and lead confidently. However, this is not what's happening, right? Instead, the toy industry, with its relentless focus on princess fashion and beauty, has quietly shaped how girls see themselves and how society sees them. These toys tell a singular story, that a girl's value lies in how she looks, not in what she can do. So again, this goes back to point number 2 that we're trying to make on how stories shape our lives. Most of the time, girls are sold products that shape what they are supposed to do in society. They're supposed to look like a princess, act like a princess, behave like a princess, be quiet. They're supposed to be seen, not heard. And they're supposed to be caregivers, whether it's nurses or mothers or teachers. They're supposed to be the support behind the system in order to keep the system afloat. Where men or boys, they're playing with the war toys, they're playing with violence, they're playing with the things that will dominate the political scene in probably not so healthy ways. For me personally, a lot of what I was taught as a young child was very subliminal in the sense of, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, I had huge aspirations to go out and have this career, but subliminally I had been taught what a woman's place was. It was to be a mother, birth children, be barefoot and pregnant, right? And that way, even though I wasn't a Christian until I was almost 19, that subliminal message through the play that I'd gotten as a child made it super easy for the gender role norms of the evangelical church to seem like they just made sense to me. Like, this is how they are supposed to be. I didn't understand that these gender roles were really rooted in patriarchal semantics that weren't really the history of all of time. They were just the history of the last 6,000 years. So number 3, how do we start to identify stories that no longer serve us? Really simple. We start asking questions. We start noticing when something might feel a little limiting or restrictive, or the little hairs on the back of our neck or our arms go up. And we're just like, you have that moment like, wait a minute, is that a patriarchal belief built into all of this that I'm believing about this story, about my life, about my place in the world? And we just start asking questions about it. We'll go much deeper into all of this in the next 6 videos, but for now, here are some questions you might want to jot down. Who benefits from this story being true? What assumptions does this story make about me, others, and the world around me? Does this story bring clarity, or does it make me feel small or trapped? Why do we assume people in the past hold the certificate of truth, one that we cannot seem to find in today's day and age? Were these people in the past, somehow more privileged, smarter, or wiser than us? Evolution would argue that they are not. Here's a little application of how this went down in my own life. I was married about, I think, 7 years when I woke up to the fact that I was not in a healthy marriage, where marriage was just difficult because marriage is difficult. I was in something people would call a verbally abusive marriage. Making that discovery, I started asking a lot of questions and came down to an understanding within another 2 or 2.5 years it took me to get there. But over time, I came to understand that gender roles had something to do with domestic abuse that I was experiencing experiencing, and that seemed to be on the rise. Maybe it's because it was being better understood, and so the rates of it being declared were on the rise, but it also seemed like it was on the rise because of this gender role issue that I was finding. So that led me to ask even more difficult questions, such as, what does a world look like? What does a religion or a faith look like when it's described by women, not by men or this male god? And that led me to further questions and further questions and further questions. So when you start to learn the practice, and it is a practice, it is a muscle of how to ask really tough questions of yourself and of what you believe, those questions will just start spilling out of you. I can remember sitting down and spending an hour journaling, and most of my journal entry would just be me asking questions, because the question would lead me to another question, and that would lead me to another question, and yada, yada, yada. Learning how to ask those powerful questions of yourself is one of the key foundations to being able to deconstruct anything in your life, to get to a better foundation for your life and for those around you. And I also want to say this little caveat. This is not my warning, but a caveat is that deconstruction is not going to happen overnight. It is a long process. It is an ongoing process. I started my deconstruction without knowing that's what it was back in 2009. And it's 2025 now. So almost going on 20 years at this point. When I started in 2009, it took me about 3.5 years at that point to actually leave the Christian church. And then I had to replace that belief system with something. So I fell prey to, and you'll hear this in some of my future videos, but to the toxic self-help world. And then I've spent the last probably 3 or 4 years deconstructing from that world. Here again, and talk more about the somatic experience that you might have as you're waking up to these stories and asking those questions that we just went over. It could be something simple as, I feel I'm ashamed, right? If shame, guilt, you want to repress that thought, you want to just kind of skip over it, you find yourself going into what's called thought-stopping cliches. You might say you're something, oh, but that's just the way it is, and I just need to get on with it, right? Any of those type of indicators on the emotional sense are indicators that what's happening is you're bumping up against a story that our cultural understanding has told us is true, but evolutionary through the body experience of living on this planet for 300,000 years before the 6,000 years of patriarchy happened, your body is telling you there might be a different story. So instead, though, of questioning whether or not this story is accurate, we typically go to questioning ourselves and policing ourselves and doing whatever we need to do to get back in line with that cultural story, instead of doing the uncomfortable work to wake up and say, hey, is it really me that's wrong here? Or perhaps it's the cultural story. Other things, depression, anger, rage that you can't name could also be indicators to this. Trauma responses to somebody doing something really small could indicate that you are oppressing and policing yourself in these areas as you start to wake up. There's so much more. I can't get into all of it, but those are some of the symptoms that you might experience, or some of the signs that you will potentially experience as you wake up to start questioning, is this really how it needs to be? Is this really healthy? Or is this pre-programmed Lego set instructions per patriarchy that I am trying to force myself to build and maintain versus doing the work of deconstruction? Right. Point number 4, why does deconstruction feel so uncomfortable, and what is my warning here? When you start to deconstruct something, you are literally going into the psyche and starting to pull out the weeds of things that don't need to be there anymore. And so you're trying to get those away from your consciousness. And like I said, you can't just take them away and not replace them with something else, because otherwise the weeds are just going to come right back in and choke out the sunlight and choke out the good nutrients. And so you have to replace them with something. And this process, as you can imagine, can feel very uncomfortable. It can feel alarming to your psyche. You can feel like you're losing part of your identity, but you might also start to feel like you don't fit in with that old identity, but you don't yet have a new place to go because you're in that process of deconstructing and rebuilding. You might also feel like you're losing some of your closest relationships, because oftentimes, especially if you're in a religious or spiritual foundation or community, the foundation of what those relationships is often based on that religious belief system or that spiritual belief system. And when you start to see that might not fit you anymore, you might start feeling feeling like you don't fit in with your friends or that community. You don't get the same enjoyment and fulfillment and joy out of it. You might start to see that your marriage isn't working. One of my key themes in my marriage, I still remember it to this day. I was in a class, and again, you'll hear this in my deconstruction journey video here coming up in a few weeks. I remember telling my mentor at that time in this class I was in that my marriage was getting worse. And she kept asking me, but are you getting better? And I couldn't answer her at first. I said, but my marriage is getting worse. Are you getting better? You're not hearing me. My marriage is getting worse. She's like, no, you're not hearing me. Are you getting better? And when I was finally able to say, well, yes, I just had to sit in that really uncomfortable spot. So here is my warning for you. Deconstruction, it is a real practical tool to dismantle things in your life that are no longer serving you, but not just in your life, but also your society. And this could get really uncomfortable for a lot of us. And the reason I mention this is because as a white woman who has become dependent on a male financially for my family's well-being, for my children's well-being, for my own personal well-being, I think this is a huge piece that we have to be aware of as a society, as this channel, and as white women trying to remove ourselves from patriarchy, is that unlike some other races, white women are the ones that have benefited the most, and I put that in quotation marks, from patriarchy, where we are oftentimes the ones that are able to stay home with our children financially. But on the flip side, that puts us in a financial abusive potential, right? Where we don't have the financial means if we start to deconstruct and see that we are not living in the healthy system, that we are living in a toxic, abusive system. We might not have the financial means to get ourselves safely out of that and to take care of our kids at the same time. I can't answer that question for you. You have to answer that question for yourself. I can't advise you. I am not a financial advisor, but all I can say is every single woman should always know her financial means and have financial means of her own that she's not dependent on for men. I believe that wholeheartedly after living the experience I have lived through. I think until you get your financial means under control, deconstructing might be difficult for you because you're not going to be willing to face those hard, difficult questions that I'm asking in all of these videos in this series on this channel. If you're not able to financially know that you're going to be okay, that your kids are going to be okay, that you're going to be safe, because safety is first and foremost in this. And it goes right down to our financial means, our second chakra. I like to put them in the first chakra, our root chakra, how we are grounded into this reality of this world. If we don't have that financial means, we don't have that safety and that security. I just have to put that warning out there. And I hope that that also helps my sisters of color understand maybe why the struggle for feminism within the white community is so different. I don't remember the statistics, but if I can remember, I'm going to link to Breaking Down Patriarchy's video about building bridges and why women of color are so exhausted. It's not the first time I've heard that message, but it's so foundational to the work that I'm doing on this channel and something I think all of us have to be aware of. All right, y'all, this has been a big one. Another big video. I'm so proud of you for keeping on track and doing this work with me. Let's move on to point number 5, which is a behavioral model, change model that we can use to help us understand as we move through the process of deconstructing what that looks like on a behavioral level. It is called the competence model. It is a roadmap for changing your beliefs. Again, while there's no real model out there except for what I laid out in the first point, where, we look at the contextual understanding of something from the past and, try to reevaluate it and question it in order to rewrite something from the past so that it affects our future in a better way. That's our model, but I wanted to leave you with the 4 stages of competence behavioral change model, because I think it's really a powerful, easy way to remember what's happening. So the 4 stages are unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. You're moving from I don't know what I don't know to I know it and I don't even have to think about it because it's a behavior now. It's so ingrained in my everyday being that I don't even have to think about it. So let's break this down even more. I just kind of gave you the overview, but number 1, unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. For example, marriage and kids is the life path that you're supposed to have, right? You don't even think about it. You don't question it. Unconscious incompetence. Conscious incompetence. You become aware of what you don't know. That is probably the most uncomfortable spot to be in, because now it's like, oh, I'm wearing sandpaper for a t-shirt. I didn't realize I was wearing it, so I wasn't uncomfortable. Now I do realize I'm wearing it, but I'm still wearing it, and it's really uncomfortable. You realize your belief might not fit, but you're not sure how to change it. You're starting to ask, is this what I really want? But you feel overwhelmed. Number 3, conscious competence. You actively work to change the belief and build something new, right? Why I keep saying, let's rewrite the stories and then tell ourselves those stories over and over and over again. Tell our friends, tell our children, tell our grandchildren the new stories based on a more holistic view of the past and present, because eventually they're going to go on to unconscious competence. The new belief becomes second nature. You've restructured your life without needing to remind yourself constantly of this new belief. For me, this really started when I started to realize that gender roles were not innate, but more derived from the Bible. And the more research I did into deconstructing gender roles from the Bible led me to deconstructing my faith overall. And I became really consciously aware of how things didn't fit. And you'll hear a lot more about this in my deconstruction video coming up in a couple weeks, maybe a couple months at this point. Everything came to this hilt where I just knew I couldn't stay in the faith, but I didn't know where I was going. So that was the step number 2, right? Like, I'm consciously incompetent at this old faith that doesn't fit me any longer, but I don't have anything in its place. And so I had to keep moving and finding something new. And it took me time, to do it again. 8 years later, I found myself having to leave another belief system and ask that big question: what is next? What do I do now with all of this that I've experienced that no longer fits me? How do I replace that? And that's actually what you're seeing me do. I'm in the process of number 3, becoming consciously incompetent at a new skill set, doing these videos, teaching all this stuff that I've learned, and helping us become unconsciously competent in these new skills. So there you have it, the working definition of what it means to deconstruct per this channel. And again, I filmed this way back at the beginning of the year of 2025, depending on when you watch this, where I started working with this material as I'm editing, doing the lives, talking about it on a daily basis. And so I've been able to simplify things. So here is my really basic definition of deconstruction that I've come to, that I wanted to leave you with, to sit with. Nowadays, Legos are sold in kits with the instructions on how to put them together. Kids get these kits, whether they're 50 parts or 5,000 parts, and they put these kits together based on the instructions. Great marketing technique. Got to give it to Lego for that. Not really. Versus those of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s, we just got a huge thing of Legos and got to put them together however you wanted. My analogy here is, imagine your kid got one of those Legos with the instructions. That's the patriarchy, right? That's how we are coming pre-programmed in this day and age. What I'm asking you to do is to pull that Lego set apart, look at the individual parts, and try to build something new with it that's going to be even better than that original Lego set. So now we have a working definition, and we understand how stories can shape our beliefs, how to start questioning those stories intellectually, but also listening to our body. We have a little teaser, if you will, of how to do that, to listen to the body, to understand if there is questions that need to happen of those stories. We understand why this work is super uncomfortable, and we also understand the behavioral change method of what it takes to move from waking up to these uncomfortable stories that have programmed us and working through the change. And again, this process does not happen overnight. It took 2,500 years, for example, for patriarchy to anchor itself into the psyche. It wasn't like overnight people woke up and were like, hey, we're going to do patriarchy, and that's going to be the structure now, and it's going to be all about power and domination and manipulation and control and narcissists and egos and yada yada. No, it took 2,500 years of this type of work. They basically deconstructed their partnership societies and built this. So now we, on the flip side, have to do that work. And again, it's probably not going to happen in our generation, but we have to start. We have to start somewhere. So I want to leave you with a somatic experiencing exercise that I teach in a lot of the lives. I'm going to give you the link down here. It's called the Somatic Shake. I will start a playlist if I haven't already, and I will link that as well to this video so that you can get some other somatic exercises. A real simple one to be able to help bring yourself back into your own body, into the present moment. And, we have to do what's called titrating in the somatic world, but it's really a pulsing. We can only push ourselves so far healthily before we're going to hit that trauma response and shut down. And again, trauma response is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So if you start to feel yourself get really angry, if you start to feel yourself wanting to run, if you start to feel yourself starting to freeze, or you're doing some of those those thought-stopping cliches, which are your fawning response, then that's something to pay attention to and pull back. You're not going to do this overnight. One of the ways is just to touch your body and to give yourself some squeezes, right? Really good in the upper body and then the loins. I don't know if you can see me on the video, but the loins, here, let me stand up, try to keep my face in the video, but real firm pressure will bring you back into the present moment, looking outside at nature, seeing the trees, seeing the birds, seeing how beautiful they sing. Any type of real time present awareness will help stop that trauma response from going further. So moving forward, we're going to dive into really understanding history from this perspective that I've built for us over these last 4 videos, and myths and where these two might cross paths and what might be more myth than history and why that's so. I'm so excited about these next couple of videos. So make sure you are following me, make sure you're subscribing, make sure you have the playlist saved, and again, telling your friends about this series and how they can get caught up with us so that they can enjoy deconstructing patriarchy with us and help us create the new stories that we're moving towards. Here are some of the questions we're going to be asking in the next videos. Who decided which stories became truth, and how can we understand and decipher truth versus fact versus story? Can we trust the past? And how can we move forward with both critical thinking and compassion? As a reminder, when I said at the beginning of the video, what we're doing in these videos in this series is we're deconstructing or dismantling how society was built to understand the patriarchal structure that became invisible underneath it all. To sign off, I want to ask you one question that you'll leave a comment and get this conversation started down below. But what is one story you can look back on in your life, whether it be more of a family story maybe, or a religious story from your spiritual path, or a cultural story from society at large, that you are now starting to see through a different lens after these first 4 videos? Leave me your comments down below. So much love. Till next time. Bye-bye.